Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, joined today by one of our writers, Alex DeMarco, who has written a piece for us called How I Became Religiously Multiple. So we will talk about Christianity, Buddhism. Before we dive into all that, Alex, hello. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, John. Yeah, absolutely. I work as a project editor for Baker Academic, where I specialize in works of Christian theology. I got into that because I went to seminary, Princeton Seminary, where I focused my studies on theology. So I kind of got into that through the subject area.
Very cool. Well, thanks for joining us today. In the essay, you talk about wrestling. Particularly challenging to you was when you began to realize how exclusionary certain parts of the faith were. You ultimately ended up embracing universalism, which I have also done. I think a lot of our readers have done. And you said it was a partial solution to the problem you were trying to explore, but not a full solution because as you continued to think about your beliefs, you were detecting still a superiority, a sense of Christian superiority. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what it was that you were wrestling with and what it meant for you to grapple with this sense of superiority.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one of those things that I'm I realize looking back, it's a hindsight clarity that I get about, all right, something's really, really bothering me. And I would I think of it as an arrogance, not so much like an arrogance in the people of faith themselves and like Christians themselves, but in the like baked into the story that we've inherited about this, how we tell the Christian story. One that supposes that there's a privileged access to truth and transformation that we have, and that if the others want it, they better come and join the club, and you don't have to say it necessarily in like a threatening way for it to just come off that way as you tell the story. That message is kind of there when we have this privileged access. It became more of an issue for me, and the more familiar I got with the Christian story and how Christian belief has developed over time, we can look historically at what the influences have been on the development of Christian thought. It's not been one thing. We can see where it's come from. We can see that at all different points. We can see that in the development of biblical texts. We can see it in post-biblical theology. We can see it in the Middle Ages, the Reformation, modern era. There's a history to this stuff, and it's messy, and there's all kinds of routes that are explored and pursued. And in that, I was struck by the sense of fallibility. I think it's really important, or it's important to me to recognize the fallibility in everything human that we do, and that includes like religious faith. Because of that, the way the Christian story is often told in mainstream Christian circles as one in which we Christians have this kind of privileged access to God, and it's how we think about revelation. We have revelation in a way that maybe others don't have. And because of that, we have this kind of privileged access. But the more I learned about the kind of messy story about how we have these ideas about revelation, how we have these texts, the Bible and other theological texts, the more I realized that that kind of privileged access didn't make sense to me. So it was both just kind of nonsensical at the same time that it was striking me as I was hearing it through the ears of others. I was hearing it. Well, what does that sound like to my non-Christian neighbors? What does that sound like to and folks who have life-giving traditions, folks who have sophisticated philosophical traditions and practices that really do seem to put them in touch with reality in a way that revolutionizes their lives, and to articulate the Christian story in a way that supposes whatever they have is probably accounted for better within my tradition just seemed untenable and increasingly untenable to me. And that's where discovering like pluralist thought really, really helped me and gave me a different way of talking about the Christian story, of thinking about the Christian story for myself, so that I could actually hold it without having to feel like there's this big ick that I can't get behind, this big like nonsensical supposition at the center of it, that I didn't know what to do with.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. And You talked in the essay is largely about your discovery of that pluralistic way of thinking and way of living. You give a lot of credit to the work of John Tatamanel. And after reading his book, you talk about not only wanting to learn from other traditions, but in the case of Buddhism, wanting to actually come to practice it. And I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what that part of your journey looked like on a practical level, like day to day, week to
Yeah.
week. What did it mean for you to begin practicing Buddhism?
Tatamanel's book, Circling the Elephant, did so much for me and giving me not only a sense that my religion wasn't, that the religious path that I knew up to that point is not the only thing that has value and not the only thing that has access to truth and transformation. My neighbor probably has, like, I would be crazy to think that they didn't have treasures, that I don't have in my own tradition. And that gives me a reason to not only affirm what they're doing, but to get to know them. And Buddhism interested me because I was already interested in perspectives that encouraged us to understand our interconnections in the world. I think this comes actually from when I was a kid. I had in my family, we would go camping. I have aunt and uncle who are big outdoorsy, ecological kind of folks, and they would always point out like ecological interconnections between things, And I was growing up in the Chicago area. We would go to the Field Museum, Evolving Planet exhibit, and the story of evolution is itself this story of development together, this like intertwining, evolving, I think really inspiring and spiritually fruitful story. And I think I had that like already in me. And I was also drawn toward just understanding our being and relationship, partly in seminary through like the Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a big influence on me then. And then later through process theologians. Like I think I mentioned John Cobb and Catherine Keller in the article. They were really important folks for me, and Marjorie Suhaki. That tradition in Christian theology insists on our reality being one in which we are what we are together. You could say, and I later learned Buddhists would say, there is no like us apart from those connections. We are those connections. And so I had learned that Buddhism does this non-dualist thing, non-dualism in the sense that we're not separate and distinguishable individuals. We're together. And then I realized that Buddhists were kind of the heavyweights when it comes to non-dualist thinking. They were the ones that had really pushed this really far, and I wanted to learn more about that. So that from there I started reading about Buddhism, and it was kind of a philosophical thing for me initially. That's what first drew me into it, and I just I have reason to believe that there's stuff here that I will benefit from. So I started doing that, and the more I read, the more I encountered folks saying, Buddhism is not just a philosophy. It is something that is more holistic than that. It's not just a mind game. It is something that a practice that tries to bring all of our existence to this experience of awakening to our interbeing, to our interconnection, to our existing in relation. So then I realized, all right, well, let me actually meet some Buddhists, because that's the other thing too. I didn't want this to be just an intellectual exercise. I wanted to meet people. I found a sangha, which is like a Buddhist congregation here in Grand Rapids where I live, and went and really liked it. And I just thought, well, all right, well, I have a lot to learn from these folks, and I got to know people, and the more I learned and the more I practiced, I started meditation, which wasn't something I'd ever done before. Actually, a lot of people I understand come to Buddhism now, especially in the West, through meditation. They're interested in meditation, and they learn meditation has this religious background, has this religious grounding, and then they learn about that larger picture. But for me, I actually came in through philosophy and then found out, oh my gosh, these people are right about meditation. This is so beneficial. So I took a class, Intro to Meditation, and it just really clicked with me. In a way, I don't really care a lot about at this point about like whether I'm think of myself as this or that in terms of like Christian, Buddhist, or whatnot. I think it's helpful. I want to be able to speak into the religious communities that I'm a part of, though, So I think it can be helpful to kind of mark your belonging and for that reason. But I wasn't like, oh, conversion is something I care about, or multiple belonging is something I care about, or I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to grow. I just wanted to realize I wanted to explore faith in a way that I hadn't before, in a way that it didn't have what felt like were unnecessary limits and things that separated me from my neighbors. Yeah, the classes were really helpful. Just had like a small core cohort of people who, together with our teachers at the temple, were able to explore some texts, some primary texts, some introductory texts, do some practice. We did, especially for those, we were doing like 20 minutes of daily meditation and journaling on that, and our teachers would give us feedback on our journal entries, kind of giving us a sense for what they were seeing in our practice, what we might try to grow and expand what we were doing, expand both our understanding and our practice. And that was really beneficial. It was really interesting to me, and I think through it all, I just started to feel like it was home, another home, because I didn't feel like I was leaving my Christian home. Actually, on Sundays, my church and my temple are on the same street here in Grand Rapids. They're both on Division. It takes 4 minutes to drive from my church to my temple. I have this wonderful group of people at St. Mark's Church, or St. Mark's Episcopal Church here in Grand Rapids. I go to the 8 o'clock service there. I've got some time to hang out with them in coffee hour, and then at 9:30 we start with the opening bell chant at the Buddhist temple. It's 4 minutes down the road. The nice thing in Grand Rapids, if you've ever been here, is nothing's ever far from anything else. So that's kind of been my pattern for the last 2 to 3 years. Not every Sunday, but most of the time, that's kind of what it looks like. During the week now, I try to do. Sometimes I'm more consistent than others, but usually I'll have like a meditation practice. I try to get it in the morning, and I do about 20 minutes of sitting meditation. I was taught through my teachers at the temple a kind of mindfulness meditation is based on the Satipatthana Sutta. That kind of starts with mindfulness of your breathing, mindfulness of your body, goes to mindfulness of mind and the objects of mind, the things that go through your mind, trying to bring more awareness to those things. And when I'm consistent with that, it really does help my day in general, and helps me kind of, I think, bring more awareness and compassion to whatever's going on in my day, which has been really beneficial. Yeah, at a certain point, the Sangha and Buddhist practice in general, the Buddhist path, it felt like another home. It felt like another path that was as important to me as my Christian path. And, they're different. I think a lot of people, especially, today, it's not crazy to have two homes. Sometimes, your family lives can be complicated, right? I think religious family life can be complicated too sometimes. To be able to make room for that, I think is a beautiful thing. Doesn't mean it's always easy, of course. There can be points of tension, and some homes are, have complications that others don't. But they're still home, and I want to be able to, have the benefits of those homes and also contribute what I can to them as well as I can.
Thank you so much. The end of the essay I really enjoyed. You talk about this principle that's important in your Buddhist practice, non-attachment. And you mentioned that for those who just haven't learned about it or practiced it, we might come to some false conclusions. We might think it's about being extremely aloof and not caring about the people or situations or places around us. And you say it's actually very much the opposite of that. As we learn to remove our clinginess in our attachment to those things, we free them from the captivity of our own expectations.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear more about just how this principle plays a role in your life and maybe how it melds with your ongoing Christian practice as well.
Yeah, I think the key here is, what kind of world are we in, and what kind of beings are we? I think non-attachment it's tricky because we like the security of knowing something. And we live in a world in which everything's always in motion and everything's always evolving, and we are too. So as soon as we latch on to a notion of the way things should be, the way things must be, the way we must be and are, if we latch on too hard, we're going to run into trouble, because the evolution's not going to stop. And we're going to either resist that in a way that does harm to us and others, who are rightfully developing in probably ways that they need to, or we're just going to be disappointed and disconnected. Actually, this is where I do think that non-attachment actually connects us. It connects us because it allows us to be there with the world that we're in and with ourselves and with our neighbors, with our friends as we change, as we move, because we move. One way this connects to the life of faith for me, and especially my connection with Christianity, is that while Christianity is definitely my first religious home, it is also somewhat like a troubled home for me. There's things in it, and I think it comes out in this piece that have sometimes sat uneasily, and there's things that can be disappointments. I try to maintain hope for what it can be, and to recognize that there is possibility. There's always possibility. I think my process theology side of Christianity comes into this too, because God is the lure that draws us to the next best thing in any moment, that works with what we have and where we've been, and offers us opportunities to grow into greater wholeness and connection. And that's like the influence of God understood through that tradition. And that to me is very important. It also connects with the Buddhist idea of impermanence, which is really, really linked to non-attachment, because it's impermanence that requires non-attachment of us. It's impermanence is that constant change, that constant evolution. It also is tied to the idea of there being no self. You might have heard of or emptiness, it's sometimes referred to in Buddhism, and what they're talking about is emptiness of a separate self. What it means is our connection goes all the way down, our interbeing, our relationship goes all the way down. There's nothing in me that doesn't come from someone else, that isn't at every moment flowing into something else. And so we don't have this unchanging separate core, this self-existence. And that, as much as it's true of people, is true of anything people do. It's true of religious traditions. It's true of Buddhism, of Christianity. And for me, that's incredibly hopeful, because it means infinite possibility. It means that just as the Christian faith has always been developing, it will continue to develop, and it can develop in healthy directions, and directions that forge beneficial relationships with like religious others and non-religious others.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you've given us so much to think about. Thank you. Anyone out there who missed this article, the link to it will be below in the video description. We'll throw in a bonus link of an interview that Amy Frickholm did with John Tatamanel, who we mentioned earlier. And yeah, thank you so much for chatting today, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, John.